Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching The Salty Sea, and I couldn't be more excited to have a guest with me today. Many of you will know him, some of you will not, and for everyone who doesn't, I can't wait for you to meet him. This is a longtime member of the Warcry community who I love watching very much, Hobby Jackal. Can you say hello to the audience and maybe introduce yourself to anyone who doesn't know you?
Yes, hello. I'm David. I am the Hobby Jackal, and I'm delighted to be here. And Dan was an inspiration for me starting a YouTube channel. And when I posted my first video, which had about 25 views or something like that, Dan actually commented on it, and it encouraged me to stick around on YouTube. So yes, nice to be here.
Wow, that's cool. You never told me that. That's cool. Thank you. Um, all right, so I'm really excited to have you on to do something that I don't get to do a ton of on the channel, which is crazy wish listing and fun stuff like that. And for me, it's crazy wish listing, but one of the things that I've always appreciated that you're able to do is actually look at the breadcrumbs they give us. So I have done something. I have actually busted out my various books with lore in them to be somewhat ready to keep up with you in this, but I can't wait to do some speculating, some wish listing. So, one thing I was excited to do is talk about third edition, but before we do that, I want to talk about the place we're currently in and what kind of unfinished business we might have in the Gnarlwood, what kinds of things that we'd love to see if we were going to get one last release in this setting or one last bit of lore for this setting, something like that before we're all done. Is there anything, before I go into some stuff that I'm into, is there anything that kind of stood out to you that felt like unfinished business?
I think it's probably the big thing that you're going to jump on, and judging by the slides that we're going to talk about mainly, and it just really is the whole last 2 years we've been heading towards Talaxis, and every single book and every bit of narrative points towards getting there. The last time something new appeared in White Dwarf as well, it was focused around these four pillars that were potentially the gateway to Talaxis, and you were fighting to get there. So yeah, it does feel like all eyes are on a catacombs style interior version of Warcry, potentially. Aside from that, the recent maps of the Gnarlwood have completely thrown me off because they home in on, they just show how vast it is and they show a whole load of sort of extra detail at sort of much larger scale. And you mentioned breadcrumbs earlier, and I was fixated on this big map and these little hints they started dropping in, and I've kind of struggled to spot anything. There's probably something there. There's probably something in there that I haven't spotted, but they're going to turn to something. But it's really hard to narrow it down now, and that's kind of where I'm at the moment.
Yeah, I spent a long time expecting it because of Catacombs and because of Gallo Dark and because Kill Team players are still playing Gallo Dark to this day. Gallo Dark was, for people who don't know, it's the essentially the sci-fi labyrinth that they made for Kill Team, and it's sort of based on what is it, Space Hulk. My buddy JJ is going to be so mad at me for blanket. I'm pretty sure it is Space Hulk though, so I've been spared. He loves Space Hulk. Space Hulk, the original, is what got him into wargaming. But it's sort of based around Space Hulk, but it's a little bit different. But it was actually brought into the new edition. It was popular enough, and they were interested enough in keeping it a core part of the game that it's actually one of the maps. In the new edition, and they've got like a whole set even in the new edition of having things for it, so I think I was really expecting it to be there, but I really would have thought they would have kept laying more breadcrumbs to it if it was going to happen, right? Because it would be such a such a huge break from what they've currently done that you would think that they would be preparing us for it, and it hasn't felt much like that at all. So that's been a bit of a surprise, actually. I don't know. Do you expect us to see anything like that?
Well, I really did, and then we're in this really. So when we're making this video, we're in what the early December,
Yeah.
and they've just kind of gone quiet for a long while. The last Warband box turned up later than the roadmap suggested it was going to turn up,
Hmm.
and then we hit the end of the roadmap, and it just gone silent, which is really odd. Uh, because the first edition of Warcry, we had big swathes of silence because we just sort of got almost like one big box a year and then a few other little bits scribbled here and there. And then,
Right.
The second edition launched and we were getting loads of stuff constantly.
Yeah, it's like the silence felt more secure when silence was the expectation. You know what I mean? Yeah. And in the absence of kind of knowing that, I kind of almost want to talk about things that I look through when I look at the books and look at what is out there and what we've been told about the Gnarlwood that I just wish was in the game or wish we could see, that might not be this kind of thing that we all assumed was promised, which was a version of Catacombs, but maybe just something else. And today, when I was looking through my book, it's going to be impossible for me to actually show the map here. But right there, this little, there, people are just not going to be able to see that at all. But there's a piece on the map called the Jail of Kragnos. And if it's mentioned in the books or described in the books, I missed it. I have not seen anything that actually says what's going on there at all. But one of the things that I really missed about AOS 3rd edition and Warcry 2nd edition kind of together is like not just our game, but like the whole Mortal Realms story of what happened in Gur this whole time really is Kragnos never really felt like he had that much personality to me. He's driving the story. He breaks out of, where he was living, or like the place where he had been. I guess potentially the Jail of Kragnos refers to where he had been imprisoned, but Alariel's kind of spell breaks him out of there. He goes rampaging around. Is the Jail of Kragnos his resting place? Or is it an actual jail where he is putting people, or where Gobsprak, the mouth of Gork, or the mouth of Mork, is telling people that Kragnos is putting him in jail and putting people there, right? Something like that. I just think if we had gone to that little spot, I know it's like outside the Gnarlwood. It's like almost like half the breadth of the Gnarlwood again. If we're doing a little like finger scale, it's pretty far outside the Gnarlwood, but it's close enough to be on the map. I would have loved to go there to kind of give Kragnos some more personality, whether it's just we're going to where he was imprisoned and looking at what's there. Maybe this is an archaeological dig, or if it's an actual jail that is being upkept, we find out more of almost like how he would do a system of government, right? Because if you're holding jails, that implies that you have like some vague sense of laws and things like that, right? Which would give Kragnos a whole more personality that I kind of felt he was missing in a lot of Age of Sigmar 3.0, and of course he's not in Warcry 2.0, but just the whole Gur story in general. So that's my little rant of something I would have loved to see. I don't know if you have anything similar or any other kind of unfinished things that you saw from the setting. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so I spent way too much time staring at that map, and I sort of rummaged a bit down here, and I cannot find the only two Warcry books I could sort of reach were two that don't have that map in them. It's two of the newer ones, and I didn't actually get every single box because money, but you could pick up the books when the boxes came on eBay quite handily, and I was like, I must absorb the lore.
Yeah.
So Kragnos is an interesting one. There's definitely a lot of disappointment in the community that he sort of turned up and stomped around a bit and then was almost again sort of like just, you're too angry for the setting. We're going to push you back into a sort of I think he's at the edge of the realms, just constantly fighting in a sort of endless fight, which seems like he'd be kind of, if he was ever happy, it feels like he would be happy with that.
Yeah. Calling him too angry is really funny, by the way.
Yeah, so too angry for Warhammer, the war game. So when I read about his jail, I think I just sort of lazily assumed that once his jail that he was jailed in. I didn't think about it anymore, but that's interesting. And I do agree, any opportunity to give him a bit more depth, I think would be welcomed by the community. So that would be cool. I think, so thinking back to that map, there were a few things that were like, it wasn't called Skitter Strand because that is a type of Ragnarok, but there was something around these spine crawler type things, and it was a
Mm-hmm.
spidery symbol. There was a chaotic place called the Tainted Wound, which just
Yeah,
sounds like a death metal band, but it just was a really chaos saturated place with really mutated gnarl oaks, and there was like a little bit of artwork about it.
totally.
Yeah, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. It's in there. So just from memory, originally I sort of thought every single one of these would be ticked off with something. So my mind
Right.
was at a buzz with these. I was like, right, spider riders, definitely. And then in the next book, they described these things as not being spider like; they were more, I think, kind of centipede like or something like that, which was also cool.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a Moon Clan kind of location in there, but that's again been linked to I think it's the Great Stinkhorn, and that was actually linked to the Underworld's Warband,
Oh,
the nightly
fascinating.
ones. I've forgotten the name. I've
Oh,
got them here
yeah.
somewhere, but
Yeah. I wonder if they were
nightly
originally a Warcry warband, because there's so many of them, right? They're only missing like two people that you would need to make them a Warcry warband. That's interesting.
yeah, that would be cool. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but yes, there's definitely some. I think I thought about every single one of those locations at some
Yeah.
point, and I was like, yes, this is going to be a thing, and it could be this thing, and many of my early videos sort of. I assumed so much that I was right some of the time.
Yeah. Well, that's really funny you say that. I completely agree. Especially it was confusing. I remember even in the early days, you were making videos about that. There were other people who were uh, sort of very dismissive of the idea of using the map as a roadmap. But then the thing that was the most confusing about the locations that never got explored is that half of the locations did get explored. So like things like the weird lights and things like the stinks. Why did I not bookmark this map? Why am I having to flip to it every time? Uh, Things like okay, I already said the weird lights, but like Camp Fortune and the Eater Pits and a few of these places did get explored and did get tied to new factions that came in. So it it makes me I mean, and this is just kind of a core of storytelling: is leave them wanting more, don't leave them done. But it does make me wish that we got more of a lot of these different things.
Yeah, and I do. So one of the most fun things about it was that some icons started appearing as the books went on. So it's this
Mm-hmm.
exact same map, and
Yep.
this is where the Escargans were sort of mentioned and things like that. These new things started popping on.
Yep.
So that was kind of exciting. I was like, this is something. And there was a part of me that wonders now in hindsight. It was just that they were updating it as they were going along. Like, somebody really creative made this map with all these interesting sounding places, some of which they knew would be tied to something, some of which they didn't.
Right.
I do wonder if some of them were then written in to be tied in at a later date by chance that they wrote something that sort of matched. Although you'd think with the gorges, the Utah pits could have just easily.
Right.
um, uh, and
Yeah.
and I think I do wonder if some of the extra ones were added in. I don't know if that was. I don't know. Actually, it did seem quite intentional. They did it about 3 times, and they could have probably the first time put a load of new stuff on in one go, couldn't they? So I do feel like it was a purposeful tease, but it's
Yeah.
interesting, yeah,
Yeah.
because not everything was something.
Yeah. So it would be cool if we got to explore one or two more of those places. My hunch is that we might be done. That's what the silence kind of feels like. But who knows? And it would be a really cool. It would be a really cool final surprise if they did that. The only thing that does make me think that we might be done with Gur for Warcry is that they recently had that white dwarf that featured campaign materials for a little place in Akshi. I don't remember exactly. It was some sort of coastline, but yeah, it was in the realm of fire, which kind of transitions me to my next uh, sort of wondering. The screen's going to go black here for people who are wondering what's going on. My poor understanding of technology is why it's going to go black for just a second. But, and so that white dwarf makes me wonder if we're going to Akshi or maybe somewhere else, or if we're following the current setting of Age of Sigmar in some sort of way, a little bit like the Gnarlwood was close-ish to what was happening in AOS 3.0. What do you make of the Vermin Doom and what kinds of settings do you think we could get into for Warcry that would be kind of adjacent to that?
Yeah, so I've got lots of thoughts on this. Before we had this call, I was sort of thinking, I pulled up my White Dwarfs, and yeah, so it was the Ravaged Coast, which was where the White Dwarf was set. So it's White Dwarf 504. This is an archipelago, am I pronouncing that correctly? Anyway, it's between the Great Parch and the Emergent North. So the Skaven and the Vermin Dune on one side, you've got the Parch on the other side, and all these little islands. What's particularly interesting, because I went back to the preview video that we had a couple of weeks ago at the championship, and they are releasing a narrative book which didn't appear in the articles, I don't think, which is also called Ravaged Coast. So there's and they're actually focusing on a place called Hell's Claw, which is just below Hell Crown, and it was controlled by Chaos.
Right here, I found it.
And now it's up for grabs. Oh, there we go. There's a lovely map. So that feels like a really likely location. I think the other location that I'm kind of drawn towards is potentially even Embergard. And there's just been loads of photos with these city. They look like whole Stigmarite city things, and sometimes the Warhammer team making scenery do amazing things. So they might have just built these.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But they look really consistent, and they look a bit like the sort of Gondor Middle Earth strategy battle game kind of kits where they've made these whole buildings out of it. And I just sort of feel like Embergard, or potentially a whole new city, mixed with the sort of ruined Dawnbringer things that we've already got and that kind of thing, would be amazing. So I may have gone slightly off your question, but
no, that's perfect.
The other thing, sorry, I think we are definitely going to be actually or Hiram, so the Realm of Life, just because that seems to be the focus. So whilst there's a lot of focus on Realm of Fire right now, the Spearhead book did specify it's like the two realms still, and the Dawnbringer Crusades went for both. So I would be shocked if we went in one or the other.
Yeah, I would be shocked as well. I think Embergard would be interesting because Underworlds is there right now, but it has a huge little square on the map here, and so it does seem like they want us to care about it quite a bit. Hell's Claw also has a little section on the map, so I love those as ideas. The thing about what you said about the little sort of ruins that they've created is it's finally been long enough since the original Warcry box for them to have heard a lot of the feedback that the original terrain is still the best terrain that they've ever made, because the original terrain is so good, both in that it looks really good, but I actually think there's been other terrain sets that I think look just as good, but it's just so playable. It's so easy to play the game on it. It's, like the doors are all in places where it makes sense to have a door. The platforms are big enough that you can have actual little mini battles on them. The uniformity of the ability to climb it and what you can climb on it is really excellent. I think one of the underrated frustrations that can happen, I'm actually looking at my meat trees right now, is it can be confusing about how much distance you are having to climb any given time you try to climb a meat tree, because it's like, am I climbing along the trunk here? The trunks aren't always in a straight line. Am I just going like to a section and going up? Can I climb these little bamboo pillars? It can be very, it's just not that easy to play on, I guess, is what I would say. And the original terrain was so easy to play on. And so I wonder, and if you've ever actually, digressing to Middle Earth strategy battle game, if you've ever played Warcry on the Osgiliath terrain that they made, it's incredible and it's really easy to play on. And it's a really good terrain set. And so I do wonder if there's been enough time now that they might actually target something like that to put into the next box.
Yeah, and the only slightly sad thing is that the rumors of these buildings, I don't know if somebody saw the pictures and then made the rumor or the rumor preceded it. But
Yeah.
it's sort of tied into this incarnate that never turned up, and that there's a picture of in the book that you're holding, or we're holding just now.
Oh no.
There's this. So for anybody that's not seen it, there's the oldest rumor engine that looks like something from AOS, which is 2 to 3 years old now. Is it 2 years or 3 years? It's one of those. It's quite a while. It looks like an Ragnarok skull, and on the Ger page of that book, in the background, there is this big incarnate type thing with this same face with the same eye missing. So it's really compelling that this thing is an incarnate. And at the start of AOS 3, was it the start of AOS 3? We had the on-spine incarnate, and they released a narrative book, and it sounded like it was going to be a series, and then it just sort of stopped. And online people have just assumed that perhaps it didn't sell as well as expected. Although I'm not sure, because Games Workshop works so far and ahead, and we're often told it's sort of like a 3-year cycle. I'm not sure if that would be enough for them to stop releasing something that they got far enough into producing, and you would painted by the time a rumor engine comes out.
Usually they at least bring the sequel out and see if one of those two sells, and then usually it gets a second chance, because like you said, they'll like flood the zone with one idea. I've noticed they do this not just with model releases, but with like rules writing ideas too. They'll do this, but they'll like flood the zone with one idea for a while, and then even if it gets poor feedback, a few more still come out before they can react to that. So you would have expected more.
Yeah, and I think which does make me wonder if it's maybe just a production issue, and they're almost waiting for that, because there's lots of talk online around production issues, and then again, there's kits out of stock, and it's not. I don't think it's so bad at the moment, but they're building more factories. So there's clearly more demand for them,
right?
And I think we all kind of feel that when we're trying to get hold of things sometimes, like a particular goblin. I forget the name of the goblins. I collect Gloomspite, and I still call them goblins. The Goblin Palooza. Warcry people were after those for a while, and then those stock levels are a bit iffy. So it just makes me wonder if maybe these ruins and this incarnate, for some reason, it was one of those easy things they could go, right, we're low on capacity. Cursed City is cursed. We just want to jiggle some things around, and it was just pushed to the side,
Right.
I don't know. Maybe to reappear.
And it could come back at any moment, really. I'm curious to see how that ends up working out. I think they've kind of gone past the worst of their production issues, from what I can tell. They can no longer blame pirates for all of their problems. They can no longer blame the pandemic for all of their problems. They kind of, if anything, they can still blame we're still catching up from when those were our problems. But I'm curious to see how much things will kind of plop into our laps now that supposedly those production issues are less of an issue. Given how much the last couple Warcry releases got delayed, I do think it's interesting that if they hadn't had shipping issues, that they essentially would have had us sitting for almost 18 months in between the last release and the new edition. But who knows? I mean, I have no idea what their plans were for that. But getting back to the settings, I liked the Emberguard idea, of course. I do want to see what a coastal Warcry board would look like if it was going to be Hell's Crown instead of Emberguard. Because Hell's Crown is in the middle of that archipelago. I would love to try to see coastal terrain. There's a lot of cool rock formations you can do, and I've seen a bunch of narrative tournaments try to do something with one side of the board is up against the ocean, and I would love to see what would happen if the sort of rules writing team wrote campaign rules for something like that. I think it could be really cool, and it could absolutely be the setting of a Warcry edition. I don't know, what would you want to see for if it was going to be Hell's Crown or something in that Akshi archipelago?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, I think so. Whilst I get excited about a city that kind of looks like stuff that we've already seen, that's kind of in the background of the photos, there's also that part of me that just really wants to see something new and exciting. And I was perhaps slightly surprised at just how long we stayed in the Gnarlwood with the meat trees. And
Yeah.
and I wasn't somebody that disliked them, but especially once I built one and had one to hand, I was like, this is massive. Uh, every time I go close to the table, it catches me, and I lift things off the table when I'm playing Warcry.
Yep.
But I forgave the trees, and I actually quite like them. But I mean, in the first edition, over those first 3 years, we had those extra boxes, which I've got one here, and you could suddenly play in a forest if you wanted to,
Right.
and really just build that, and that's nice. And I was just using existing kit, and I think it's a shame we're not popping up in different places. So the coastal side of things could look absolutely amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
I say that there's not. I'm one of those people that just gets excited by nearly every release. So I'm not a great person to be a critic at any point. I'm usually like, oh, I love this new thing,
Yeah.
and they just dangle a carrot for me, and I'm one of those people that's like, yes, I will take my money. But yeah, I keep on. So when we're talking about the coastal side of things, there's Warboss Kurgan, and I think that's his name on his Instagram thing, that has pirate orcs and does a lot of narrative stuff. And I keep on thinking of things that he's built, which look really great and kind of have ramshackle, nautical kind of fortifications, and they look great. So yeah, I would like that, and I think the fact that you could have part of the board blocked off slightly and that kind of thing with the sea would be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep seeing narrative tournament directors try to figure out how to do it, and I think that those sorts of weird little campaign details is something that the Warcry team actually kind of excel at, and so I would love to see them take their hand at it. Two other little settings because I wanted to try to think outside of what's currently happening. I know that Warcry has always matched or closely matched the AOS story, but a couple places that I think are really interesting in the AOS core book that I think it would be really cool to explore in Warcry are Shaiish, just because the map has this. The map is just incredible for it and different than anything we've ever seen. And then Ulgu, the map for Ulgu is wild in terms of the way everything is like spiraling down towards this little toilet bowl in the center of Ulgu. I don't understand why that is, but all of the continents of Ulgu are being like sucked into this vortex in the center of it. And there's, it's got, so one thing they show in the core book is these little green dots where the vermin doom has gone into every realm. And most of the realms don't have very many. The realm of fire is, of course, covered in them. But then Ulgu and Haish, actually, am I saying that right? I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but the realm of light, they have a few more than you'd expect. Ulgu, I was remembering more actually in the realm of light. Now that I actually look at the map for it, there's not that many, but Ulgu has a whole bunch of them, and they're in some really important places on the map. And so if the AOS book is like showing you that there's a lot of Skaven incursions into the realm of shadow, I'd love to see what they would do with shadow terrain. I have no idea what my concept is there for what I'd actually want to see like on the board. But, if there's one thing, even as someone who is critical of the Gur terrain, it was beyond my imagination. I could never have imagined what they actually achieved with that terrain. And whether or not I like it or not is kind of separate to having a lot of respect for how out there it is. And I really like AOS being like, I one of the things I like about the Mortal Realms as a city is that it's just out there in a way that is beyond your imagination. And so I think that the Realm of Shadow could be a really interesting place to deliver us something that we've never really thought of before, never really conceived of before. So that would be a really cool one to explore. I don't know. Do you have any realms that you wish you could see on a Warcry board?
Yes, all of them. We should go to one every 3 months. But yeah, I think
Yeah, I'm into it.
that's really interesting. So Olgu. So you said like the toilet bowl, I reckon that's Malarian's toilet bowl in the center there, and
Your
so
boat. Okay.
this is the place that's hiding the Umbraneth, which apparently isn't their official name. That was somebody cheekily like editing a Warcom thing to make it look like they accidentally said it or something.
Okay.
So, but this is the name that Malarian's forces have adopted, and he's loitering in the lore. It would be interesting if there's lots of Skaven there, where they're going to lean into that towards the end of this edition and potentially go a bit Ulgu ways. So, I mean, I will talk about the realms, but thinking about Ulgu, there is the fact that they held on to one really old unit of Skaven in the Skaven battle tome that they didn't update, which was the Gutter Runners, which the Eshin and the Assassins that are kind of shadowy, and also we know that the spiders are still going to be in the glue spike Gitzburg because they mentioned it in Warcom. So we are lacking new spider riders. So I mean that would be amazing. Anyway, we're going to talk about Warbands later. But if it was in the realm of shadows, I would just chuck in those rats and those spiders because the Arachnaroks that don't have anybody riding them are direct. Oh no, actually they're tied to Shaiish. What am I thinking? Oh, I don't know. Anyway, I sort of they might be connected to the Realm of Shadow. I actually think they're connected to Shaiish now. So the little chameleon skinks are Ulgu. Anyway, this is a bit of a ramble. Which is my favorite realm? Yeah, I don't know. I quite like Giran. I quite like just the idea of a really overgrown, colourful. So when people, I'm waving this book around, this box around, but I still haven't actually built this one. It just feels like a treasure. But this is the one with all the trees.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for just holding on to this box and not having built it. But people think it's brilliant ones where it's sort of bright pink and that kind of thing. And I just want to, I want to see some really colourful terrain. But I think the coastal kind of thing can tick that off as well. Like I think it could be actually quite a nice looking kind of white sand coast. And then you throw down these, battling on it, bright blue seas in between and that kind of thing. And then just throw down a load of horror. And I think that would be quite nice.
I like the Giran idea. The war between Nurgle and Alariel was one of the things when I started painting GW fantasy stuff. That was one of the things that kind of drew me in the most at first was hearing about that and seeing hearing about Giran and the cities that honestly don't belong in there, like Greywater Fastness. And how they somehow exist there and how they're part of that, the war of life in there is really cool. You touched on Warbands, so I am going to run and get a power cord to plug my laptop in, and then we are going to talk Warbands because I'm really excited about that, and I think that there's a lot to get into. All right, so I'm back. My computer is plugged in, and I can't wait to talk about the new Warbands that we could expect. We only have... And I was actually shocked to look through this and find it, but we only have 6 factions in Age of Sigmar that don't have Warcry warbands yet. And they are Idoneth Deepkin, Kradron Overlords, Ironjaws, Gloomspite Gitz, Skaven, and Slaanesh. I think that there's a lot we could speculate on about which warbands would lead the next edition. So maybe we start there and then we'll go to wish listing what we'd actually like to see in each of these factions. What do you think, if you were just going to take a wild guess at what's going to lead the next edition, what do you think would it be?
So, if I had to take if I had to take a realistic guess, there is that part of me that does just wonder if Stormcast would just sneak in there again, just because Stormcast, because they love Stormcast. Although Warcry's often been treated differently. So but if you had to guess, you could just always say Stormcast for anything, and you would be kind of safe. I think Skaven are incredibly likely though, so it does feel like they held back a Gutter Runners refresh, and they feel like a kind of unit that could be equipped and nice. So Skaven Assassins, I think I probably quite likely would make a logical launch. I did think after what you said earlier about the 18-month gap as well, if things had arrived to time with the last roadmap, I suddenly thought we kind of had that with Underworld. And it does make me wonder if they're almost suddenly like, okay, we're heading towards this next edition. Let's just hold back on that stuff. A lot of people
Sure.
theorized that there's been quite a drop of Warbands, and there was suddenly a halt in the previous season where it was just the box and then nothing.
Hmm.
But it does make me wonder if there's stuff they have that's almost slightly repackaged, repurposed, and we might get quite a lot of the start if they do hold back. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, in terms of warbands, I mean, I my heart is green. I would probably say grots, but
Uh-huh.
that's just because that's what I want to see, and they're on this list. Uh,
Absolutely.
but yeah, it's so hard to call though.
Do you think that GW do you believe that GW believes? I mean, it's a roundabout set of weird questions, but uh, do you think, man, a joke I make sometimes is that Nottinghamology is an inexact science, but I wonder or not if Nottingham thinks that every release needs to have an order warband in it. Um, Warcry, of course, has been the one exception where the game started as chaos only, and then even 2.0 was chaos versus chaos, much to the chagrin of some fans, actually. But I do wonder if the man, you see almost every single, whether it's 40K, there's always an Imperium army in there in every launch box. In the Mortal Realms, everything except for Warcry has launched with at least one Order faction in there. I kind of wonder if they would just like go back to that default for Warcry, essentially, if they would let Warcry continue to be the kind of black sheep with that. I would like it to be. Um, I actually think Idneth Deepkin and Caradron Overlords are both really cool, but I don't necessarily see them as essential to any storytelling right now to where I could see them launching a box. I'm 100% with you about Skaven. And actually, I hadn't really called this at all, but the fact of what you said that the gutter runners are conspicuously absent from the current Skaven release, and the fact that in the core book, there are just a lot more little Skaven green things in the realm of Shadow than in any other realm. It would be really cool to see Skaven invading the realm of Shadow in the next Warcry, in the first Warcry release box. Um, there's a lot of cool things happening there, both with Malarion, who we haven't seen, and with all of the drama with Slaanesh. And of course, we haven't seen Tyrion, who is, if anything, is, you know, given various like hints we've had in stories, he may or may not be kind of on guard to make sure that Slaanesh doesn't get out of his little prison. And of course, that prison is halfway in between the realm of shadow and the realm of light, and so it would be easy to set something in the realm of shadow but have it be vaguely tied to Slaanesh's prison. Part of this is tough because I know I'm a Slaanesh fan, and I know that GW definitely sees Slaanesh as the fourth most important chaos god, and certainly not front and center. But uh, I do just wonder, especially, man. Now I'm just having too much tinfoil hat stuff. But like, Emperor's Children are coming out for 40K in a year. So why not have Warcry be Skaven versus Slaanesh, or Skaven versus um, some other Order warband that gets to have a second faction now, and then Slaanesh gets released right away as like the next, the little adjacent faction that comes out, like how they're releasing these hobbits and these orcs in Kill Team right on the heels of their Bugs versus Humans release, something like that. I could really see that. That would be really cool. I wouldn't bet on Realm of Shadow over the Realm of Fire for all the reasons you talked about before. But anyway, that's my long rant about how it would be cool to have Gutter Runners versus Slaanesh to launch an edition. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah. So Lanesh is a really interesting one. I say really interesting. It's interesting to me, who stared at a map for a long time in second edition. So going back to the second edition map,
Yeah.
because I'm going to keep on talking about this for as long as I can. loads of icons, loads of icons in black, and then we had these 3 chaos symbols that added a little color to the map. So
Mm-hmm.
there was the ancient corn and Nurgle, and they all had their little shade of color, and there's just no Slanesh. And we're all kind of, or I was kind of expecting it to sort of pop up on one of these editions at some point, or they were just going to expand or zoom down a little bit. But apparently, Slanesh hates the Gnarlwood. just avoided it. Just like that. Not for me. Not for me.
It's muddy in there.
I mean,
it's
I still sort of think
sweaty.
of the
There are
unmade.
flies.
Yeah. It's I don't know. I mean, it's odd, isn't it? It's just like, no, you're just into everything, but no, not the Gnarlwood. There, it's like that's a step too far.
Right.
Yeah. So I always thought the unmade were kind of like the original ones had that slight leaning towards different gods, but they are a real outlier, just because at its heart, Warcry has still kind of served the chaos lines really nicely. So actually, yeah, I think Skaven and Slanesh having a chaos box again, it would feel very, very Warcry.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool, and there's a lot you could do with that. If you had Skaven just be the thing everyone expects from Skaven, which would be, I think, the Eshin. I could even see them doing like some other sort of Eshin thing, whether if maybe it's not gutter runners, but it's some other new Eshin troop or something around that lines, right? That seems less likely, but there's a lot you could do with Eshin beyond what the old sculpts do. Slanesh, every single chaos god that has gotten a release has been something that was almost opposed to what the god was doing, right? Like Rotmire just have an incredibly different vibe than regular Nurgle does, where like they're these doctors who have sort of become explorers now. They're like these the Rotmire lore is really interesting, the way they were essentially doctors who were sort of in a group of medical professionals who believed in healing things a certain way, and then they were cast out, and then Nurgle adopted them once they were cast out, and it's all really interesting. And then they've become these sort of swamp explorers after that happening, and they're very fit, and they're very like sort of survivalists almost, in a way that regular Nurgle things are not. And then the Jade Obelisk are completely different looking than anything in Tzeentch. I guess Khorne does prove the exception there, where they just they took one model in Khorne and they said, what if we had a bunch of humans who all wanted to be that model, in terms of Karanak and the Fleshhounds. That's a pretty cool take, but something Slaneshi that is really different. I know like a lot of people would be really happy to see something that was themed around Glutos and how he's sort of very big and hungry. I would like to see Slanesh that was like very wizardy. I know Tzeentch is classically the sort of heavy wizard chaos god, but Slanesh are like part of excessiveness. You can be excessively nerdy, right? Like I could see like bookworms being a very Slanesh thing. I think there's a lot you could get into for there. If it is down the middle and going in Akshi, I won't be disappointed at all if it's in the Realm of Fire. I think there's still a lot of really cool things you could do there. And I think Idoneth Deepkin in the Realm of Fire could be really cool, as far as the boiling seas that are happening there and all the sorts of tropical fish that happen in really hot places. I don't know. Do you have any ideas for one of the other factions here that could fit the Realm of Fire, that could launch a box?
Yes.
Yeah. Unload as many of them as you want
list,
to.
Right? Okay, well, all right. The floodgates are open. So, so what's interesting is if we look back at how many of the warbands felt like they really aligned to Ger, it was, I mean, I think
about half, maybe.
The Crawl Boys one really did, because they're stealing eggs.
Right.
I love the egg rot. And perhaps even the dwarfs that they were. Oh,
The
I've
Fire
forgotten the name of them
Slayers.
now.
Yeah, they were perfect for Gur. And
Yes,
they were
fire
also
players.
into eggs. Yeah.
Yeah. Also into egg versus egg. So that felt good. But I think the Gorges kind of fit, but they were very much replicating the unit as it was before and things like that. So I think
Right.
there's that kind of flexibility that some of them may match the theme quite well, but I do wonder if the theme comes after most of these things are in. There's a part of me that always wonders if a lot of
Mm-hmm.
this is written, or even the theming of the realm is unknown at the point that these things are being designed,
Right.
or most of them. So that's it doesn't really answer the question though. And I think sometimes they do fit the theme really well. So there's probably maybe a bit of a mix.
Mm-hmm. But for example,
So what have we got
Pyrogeists
left?
don't fit the theme at all, right? Pyrogeists are like, if anything, you'd expect them to come up next edition in the Realm of Fire, wouldn't you? So,
Um, yeah,
yeah.
that's very true. They should have held them back. Sorry to Nighthawk fans, but gone
Yeah.
too early.
Yeah.
uh, so the Idoneth. In fact, I might just reel off my ideas for each of them. Shall I do one at a time, and then we can have some back
Absolutely.
and forth.
Go for it.
Okay, just kind of I will just talk, and it will just fill this entire
Yeah,
video. So
go
we need some back and forth. So
Yeah.
the Idoneth, I don't have the strongest of views upon because I like it. I think with these, like with the Caradron as well, I'll put these two together.
Mm-hmm.
Idoneth and Caradron, they're very Age of Sigmar.
Yes.
They are so unique that, and unlike the example you've given where that you sort of see Chaos has such a lineage going back years where we sort of know what that looks like, and then they throw something different in, and we're like, oh, that's different. Whereas I feel like with Idoneth, if they threw something in, I don't know if I could tell if it was different because it might just be another weird scene. It's
Right.
like now they're on starfish, but maybe not starfish. Or actually, that's what I'm choosing.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there's a starfish involved. And for the Caradron, again, I suppose the Caradron one could be different. They could be seafaring. They could actually be not flying. They could be
Mm-hmm.
seafaring, for example, which
Right.
could be great, and it would be a sort of about 10. What are your thoughts on those two?
Yeah. So if Caradron can have skyships, submarines should only be one step away. So you could absolutely see them even fighting IDK under the sea, or you could see them certainly in any kind of archipelago place if it was in Hell's Crown. For Idoneth Deepkin, it's like for any given Idoneth Deepkin release, you can just go with literally any sea creature. And I would love to see for Realm of Fire. And one thing that they love to do is make something that's maybe mechanically a little bit different than the faction is. So, for example, like slow Idoneth Deepkin could be really interesting because Idoneth Deepkin are so fast, right? And I don't know why this is coming up for me, but have you ever seen pictures of those snails that live next to underwater volcanoes?
Yes, yeah, they've got like metal in their shell or something, haven't they?
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
yeah. I find those to be absolutely wild. And so things like those kind of extremophile creatures that live in the ocean in really hot parts of the ocean could be really interesting. Undersea snail riding Idoneth Deepkin sound pretty silly, but almost every Idoneth Deepkin concept sounds pretty silly until you see it on the board, and most of them are pretty cool. I think the only one that's not universally beloved is these eels, which I like the eels, but not everyone likes them. But like the IDK riding a turtle and putting a big carriage on top of a turtle, to hear that said would not sound cool, but then you see it, and I think the Idoneth turtle is incredible. And so I would love to see them riding those volcano snails into battle. And yes, they would be slow, but they'd all be T6. And finally, Idoneth would have some staying power, which would be really nice. So that's my wish list for the Idoneth. Yeah, so you are a greenskin player at heart. What are your wishes for Iron Jaws, whether we were in the Realm of Shadow or the Realm of Fire?
Yeah, so, as soon as you said slow Idoneth as well,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help picturing a walrus.
Oh, yeah.
And that would be a departure as well, because suddenly we're on aquatic but land mammals, and that could be the way they shift. They're just like suddenly, no, it's not deep sea, it's a walrus. They're
Yeah.
flopping along the land on a walrus. They want the greenskins. I mean, I hope they get a walrus as well. So the Iron Jaws are an interesting one because officially their faction do have a warband because they've been squished together with the Cruel Boys again. So if you're taking this as sort of faction by faction, but
Yeah.
what we do know is that if you look at Underworlds, they're not they don't play by those rules anyway, because they sort of have slowly filled in almost every faction, I think, pretty much now, but they didn't do it equally. So for Iron Jaws, I thought about the Grots a lot, but not the Iron Jaws so much. And smaller pigs. That's not a different idea. I don't really have a good idea for them.
So the only idea I had for them was if we had gone to one more release in Warcry 2.0, it would have been really cool to see if you were to say the jail of Kragnos is actually now still a jail. The Iron Jaws would be the perfect like destruction, just like jail wardens. You know, like if Kragnos were ever to toss someone in jail, I could see Iron Jaws with these like big manacles, a little bit like that Cruel Boys team, Manok and all his guys have little shackles, but Iron Jaws would do it big, and they would have just like these big iron chains that they would wrap you in. Something like that could be pretty cool, but I have no idea what I would want to see from a Realm of Fire or a Realm of Shadow set of Iron Jaws. I don't think of Iron Jaws as being that sneaky, but there is that sort of orky idea that if you paint anything purple, then it becomes invisible. So why couldn't Iron Jaws in purple armor be the secret agent Iron Jaws? Iron Jaws on fire just seem like a much clearer idea to me, right? Where it's there is the red Iron Jaws team where they're really into pigs, and I know Gorgruntas already have a sculpt, but something like Speed Iron Jaws could be kind of interesting on the field. I think it would be tough mechanically because you'd have like it'd be like Gorgers where you only have 5 of them or something like that. I mean, it'd be tough to represent that on the table, but I think there could be a lot you could do with that. Or we only have the one Iron Jaws wizard, but he is kind of fiery. He's like shrouded in smoke. So you could see kind of smoke shrouded Iron Jaws, sort of wizardy Iron Jaws. I just went with wizardy Slanesh, so they wouldn't put out both of those, but it is a concept of sort of, you have your army, now we have the magical group of that army. It's sort of like what they did with Stormcast and Sacrosanct Chamber, and they did with Lumineth have some units that are wizard units, and it's a whole unit of that. Not a lot of other armies have that version, and so that's something you could kind of plug into almost any faction that does do magic. I don't know. It is hard to. You're right. Iron Jaws is the hardest one to think about because their aesthetic is so set. Because they're just like big, chunky orcs with armor on. Except for the naked ones they just put out. Maybe like an all weird brutes team would be interesting, something like that. I'm not sure. Are there any teams, like, who would you bet on to double up first? Obviously, Slaves to Darkness have doubled up and tripled up and sextupled up, but as far as getting a repeat warband early on in 3.0, like, what would you expect for that, and kind of what would be an idea that you like for it?
Yeah, so it is really interesting, and touching on the Iron Jaws some more as well. I just sort of reflected on what we do see, and it's like these are Nighthaunt, but somebody set them alight. These are these are Leech followers, but they like smashing statues, and they have chisels and hammers and all that kind of thing. And it's almost like a little nugget of an idea. Or these Cruel Boys like catching critters, and that really shapes the whole warband. So it could be anything. It could be these angels like making pottery, or they're into botany, or or they like shouting. But and that's the hard thing. It's almost like it's any little grain of an idea, and then they can really.
Hmm.
So I did think of something that maybe would fit with actually. So they could be on desert plains iron jaws. They could be like on a
Sure.
big camely type thing, or
Oh,
have hoods or something like that. But
yeah.
I think this is what makes it so hard with Underworlds is even weirder because then you get things that don't even exist as factions turning up and you know
Yeah.
uh, so so yeah. Sorry, what was the question? I got excited about an idea.
So you actually ended up touching on it with Underworlds because something I'm fascinated about for Warcry is when will we see either A, they double up and give one faction multiples, or they start to do Warcry warbands that don't really tie to any one faction very well. And we could kind of see either one. And I was just wondering if you had any wish listing or ideas for things that we might see along either of those two lines.
Mm. So I think Soulblight probably have a good chance of doubling up because there's rumors they're going to see more stuff, and I
Hmm.
just feel like
They're
if they were
ridiculously
going to get
popular.
stuff,
Like Soulblight, the popularity of Soulblight blows my mind. How in every version of the game, whether it's Age of Sigmar or Warcry, it's just they are mind-blowingly popular. So I could see why they would double up early. Yeah, totally. Go on. I'm curious about your thoughts on them.
yeah. So there's big rumors that they're going to get basically like the Git mob have got now.
Okay,
So that doesn't play into Warcry at all because the Git mob hasn't, as far as we've seen. However,
right.
again, we're going to talk about Gloomspite at some point. Um, but within them, there's clear factions as well. There's the wet dead, the zombies. There's the dry dead, the bony skeleton ones, and then there's the vampires in amongst there as well, being the vampy dead kind of. I don't
Hmm.
know if that's a great way of mixing them up, but they could do something
Yeah,
really different. And the Eskergum was such a they were one of those they were a real departure and they looked quite unique. But we didn't have anything like the sham. We didn't have any skeletons. We didn't have any zombies. We didn't have any of that side represented there. So I think
right.
they're a good contender. You could probably say that about a few other factions as well. I think what was another one that I was going to say? Mine's gone blank.
Well, it's funny that Gloomspite haven't gotten one yet because when I think about what are the most popular factions in the game, it's Stormcast, Cities of Sigmar, Slaves to Darkness, Gloomspite, and Soulblight, of course, being number one. Um, I'd really say it's like those five just seem to be so far ahead of every other faction in terms of popularity or how much you hear people talk about them. Um, so it's so strange to me that Gloomspite don't even have a Warcry warband yet. Uh, did you get to mention your ideas for Gloomspite? I think we ended up skipping over them, didn't we?
Yeah. So, well, my first idea, which has been my idea forever, so I may as well stick with it now because if
Yeah,
it's eventually right, I can be like, yeah, I said that. I said that years ago.
yeah,
I one of my earliest videos mentioned spider riders. So
yeah.
spider riders.
Of course.
We we've got a good hint from Warcom that they are staying in the next battle tome, which was a risk because these, the savage orcs or bone
Hmm.
splitters rather did disappear, and they have a similar look at present. So but
Yeah,
the spider kids have the big spiders, the arachnorops have stood up really well, whereas the current spider riders
the
were
little
clearly
ones.
designed for really narrow,
Yeah,
uh, rectangular cavalry bases. So, I mean, a dynamic five spider team could work really well in Warcry and it'd be quite interesting.
hmm,
And it would be a cavalry piece that can go up walls, so it would still work.
yeah,
Um, the thing about Gloomspite is it's such an amalgamation now of multiple factions within a kind of conglomerate. So you got the Squigs and the Moon Clan and the Troggoths, and now you got the Git mob. That there still is that part of me that would still love to see them doing what we chatted about earlier, where they just go, well, these ones are on fire, or these ones really
hmm.
like wars, or these ones have grown up in a polar region, so they're wearing furs, all that kind of thing, and just seeing them run with it, so it's something completely different. But I slightly suspect that because Gloomspite have so many sort of differences within their faction, I wonder if they'll be a bit like Horn and the ones that really like the the hounds, and we'll get a slightly more sort of pared back one that will stand next to some of the models. Well, like I think
Yeah.
I'm hoping there'll be a squig if it's not the Spider Riders, something squiggly.
Yeah, and this is why you're the master of this, because when you lay it out, it almost feels like too obvious to be anything but that, because like, and it's not something I would have thought of, but then when you say like the book still has them, but the sculpts everyone agrees don't hold up. And so I mean, GW can be like, they drag their feet on updating some sculpts and then they don't on others, but it all just seems to make perfect sense because Kill Team, one thing that people complain about and then other people really like is half the Kill Teams are just a unit that's existed in the game forever. And then half the Kill Teams are something wild and new. And Kill Team's been seemingly pretty committed to going kind of 50-50 with those kinds of concepts, you know? And so if Warcry were going to have a similar philosophy where half of them are something wild and new and half of them are something that is just a warband or like an AOS unit, Spider Riders are the perfect thing to have for that, especially when if it's just one unit that they need, like if they keep the Arachnarok, because like you said, it totally holds up. If all they need is one unit, then they just seem like the perfect fit to update in for Warcry the same way Chameleon Skinks did or Gorgers did. That does seem like the perfect fit. A little bit like what we said about Gutter Runners, which is interesting. I think, yeah, and I think that would get a lot of people. I think a lot of people would be excited about that because, like I said before, Gloomspite is one of those ridiculously popular factions that people, just lots of different people are super into them. You know, the squig as a concept, I can't believe how well it works, but it works. It's just a little bouncing meatball, but lots of different people just keep coming back to the squig. What is it about like the squig as a concept for you? Like, I don't know, what is so lovable about the squigs?
Yeah, so one of the first models I ever picked up was a squig hopper, and I didn't really
Uh-huh.
know what it was. I just knew that I liked it, and yeah, it's like a space hopper with teeth, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I like the meatball, bouncing meatball as well. I mean, that's a good description. Yeah, they're just brilliant, and they should look more ridiculous, I think, than an elf riding an eel. Really,
Mm-hmm.
if you're just saying it's just this bouncing ball with teeth,
Right.
and they're usually painted bright red, but
Yeah.
somehow they I don't know if they are any less ridiculous than an elf riding an eel. But I'm probably used to it now. I saw these things as a kid. I've grown up with squigs. They are a normal part of my life. I'm accepting of
That's
them.
funny.
So I don't know anymore.
A long time ago, I built and painted a squig warband that was like Sneaky Snufflers and Boingrot Bounders, and it was when I was excited about Warcry as like a testing ground to see if I wanted to collect something for Age of Sigmar. Before I got really into sort of just going wide with Warcry, and they had the same effect on me that elves and honestly Slanesh have on me in Warcry, whereas I really like the look of them once I've painted them, but I find the process of putting them together and painting them to be torturously difficult because goblins, a lot like elves, have those tiny little pieces to them that just make the assembly so difficult, or at least to me, like so much more difficult than other kits. Like I've put together. I've got them behind me, some Namarti thralls that were just ridiculously difficult. And these little guys, this one's unpainted, but these Lumineth wardens are just really hard to paint for being tiny little line troops. And so, yeah, goblins have that same effect on me, but I really admire the people who can paint 60 goblins for an AOS army and just like do it like exhaling. I find that incredibly impressive.
Yeah, I think I'm at around 90 goblins on foot, but uh, that's taking me like years, probably half a decade, maybe longer, because I'm just a very, very slow painter.
Yeah,
And a
yeah.
lot of those were the gold pass ones that came out years and years ago, and they were like
Mm-hmm.
single plastics. So
Mm-hmm.
you only had about 5 sculpts. And what I ended up doing, and this is really quite boring, was I painted the same model 5 times, exactly the same model. And it actually made me slightly faster. And I feel like my painting got slightly better as a result of doing this,
Oh,
but
sure.
it was my brain did slightly melt. But grots, goblins, they're great.
That's awesome. All right. So for one last thing to mess around with.
Yeah, before we move on, shall we
Oh, yeah.
mention Sons of Behemoth?
Oh, yes. Oh, please do.
If if
Okay.
if they could appear in Warcry,
Yes. Sons of
uh,
Behemoth. What could they do?
so I feel like a single ale guzzler size thing, and they just go, right, this warband is just a monster. They're playing by the monster rules. We're going to release a new ale guzzler size priest
Uh huh.
or something like that. Maybe a female sculpt just to
Yep.
diversify. Uh, that could work. It would be an interesting one. I
Yeah.
mean, maybe there's a part of me that feels that it would need like a couple of pets, a couple of little things, little gribblies to just make it actually function.
Sure.
I suppose the trickiness is match play for any of these kind of things. So I'm very narrative. I'm not very good at playing for starters.
That's
Uh,
okay.
but when I do play, it's very narratively driven. I'm like,
Uh
well, this
huh.
guy would clearly just run forward and die because rot,
Yeah.
and this is okay.
Um. Well, if you play Grots the way I do, you run forward, you throw your net, you roll a one, and then you do end up just running forward and die because you rolled that one on the net. Um, so, okay, matched play. The only thing about matched play is like monsters have been so embattled in second edition, or sorry, yeah, second edition, where the game started, they were all way too good. Every single monster was too good, except for the Arachnarok, because the base was so big you couldn't fit it anywhere on the board. I don't know. Have you tried to play your Arachnarok in Warcry much?
So my Ragnarok's in a box and it's unbuilt, and
Okay.
I feel quite guilty about that. I spent far too long just painting the same goblins.
Yeah. um, well, I'm glad you didn't have to experience the heartache of trying to maneuver it around a Warcry board because it is incredibly difficult. But every other monster was way too good at the beginning. And so they all had to be nerfed. And it almost feels like the current monster rules for matched play, it's just really hard to get them to be balanced in a way that they're not either costing you too much from the rest of your warband or just being dominant on the board. I'd love to see them tweak them though, because some people really like monsters, and it is an incredible feeling. Like the cinematic appeal of having one warband is a monster and like four other guys, and the other warband is nine guys, and um, that kind of like styles make fights, right? Like contrast in approach is such a powerful force in any kind of strategy game. And so I think an ale guzzler with four pets would be an incredible warband if they could do it and if they could make it compelling with the rules. I mean, there's nothing you can't achieve, right? If you test your rules long enough. And I think that would be cool. And also, Sons of Behemoth could use, like AOS Sons of Behemoth could use some pets, right? Like if they gave us some sort of Ale Guzzler sculpt and then it came with pets and then that became a unit in Sons of Behemoth, that could give them a much more interesting playstyle. Because I've heard the Age of Sigmar community complain a little bit actually about Sons of Behemoth being like kind of an awkward fit in terms of how they play and how they don't play in some parts of the game and they do play in other parts. And like what you said of it being either a priest or a wizard, I think could be really interesting because Sons of Behemoth are so bad at both of those things in Age of Sigmar. So giving them a sculpt through Warcry could be really cool. That's awesome. I didn't think of that at all. And now that you say it, it's like it works really well. I think it could be a really good fit. That is something that you would have thought would have been in this edition if it were going to happen. But that
Yeah,
happens.
yeah. I don't know. They might have just thought that this isn't going to happen, but it would be really cool to see.
Hmm.
That would be one of the most exciting Warcry reveals ever. It's like, oh, there's just a giant.
Yeah.
It's a little fun thing.
Yep.
It would be great.
And any complaints about bespoke warbands being a little undertuned? Well, this giant would still have Dragon Maul just like every other monster, so it would be really good at some things. um, yeah, that could be really. I would love to see that happen. And then it would be allyable because it would be your leader and something else, um, which could be really neat. Uh, so I think we're getting towards the end here, but I wanted to know if you had. Hold on, let me fix this slide in how the recording looks at it. There we go. If you have any kind of final wishes or final theories that are kind of deep in your bones about what to expect or what to hope for from third edition, um, that that you want to get off your chest, because I've got a few, but I'm curious about your thoughts first.
Yeah. So yes. One of the first thoughts is, and this is something I didn't say about catacombs. I have a slight concern that inside Games Workshop, or the decision making side of Games Workshop, they may have thought that catacombs didn't do very well. And the reason I think this is that I bought a discounted copy of Catacombs from Games Workshop online, and that never happens. I don't think I've ever seen. So it went down to how much it was, but it was discounted, and it was really unusual at the time,
Yeah.
and that's why it stuck with me. And the trickiness is, I hope there's some realization that it doubled up on a lot of stuff. So I had the original box. The reason I didn't buy Catacombs straight away was that it had the same core book, and it had one side of the board was the same and had the runes and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it was a great version of the game, and I just slightly worried that maybe it didn't sell very well for those reasons, that it was doubling up. And it was about the same price, I think, as the original box, which was an amazing value box. The chaos critters as well as all the scenery and that kind of thing.
Right.
So yeah, there's But going back to your question, I think for third edition, my hope is very little change, really. Just kind of because Warcry is great. There's the sort of. I think it would hopefully be a polish again, very much like the first or second edition, maybe even less so. And my feeling as a narrative gamer is that probably the narrative side of things again would be open up to far more change, maybe some further depth, maybe because in Inga, rightly so, you can't really build a camp and rely upon it because they're losing it constantly, and that was played into in the rules, and I really liked that, and it suited the Gnarlwood brilliantly. But if we're going somewhere else, we should be able to build encampments, and that could play into the narrative really nicely, so that you can boost your team and boost your stats and all sorts of things by perhaps building this encampment and building it up and that kind of thing. So I think there's lots of potential there, and I'd like to see them maybe go in that direction. And we've also had the rules for spending X amount of points to increase the stat and that kind of thing, so they could build that into the narrative, so you're really shaping your characters, as well as artifacts that do similar things. But yeah, that's kind of my main thoughts, really. I've said a lot in this video.
And I'd love to see encampments affect your whole team. One of the things that can happen sometimes in Warcry campaigns is you just get one big terrifying hero, because like you stack a couple artifacts and a couple heroic traits onto the same guy. You can't do multiple artifacts, but like an artifact and a heroic trait onto any hero that costs more than 200 points, and then all of a sudden it just becomes this terrifying thing on the board. And to see something that could help you make stories about your warband where you're not just making a story about your hero but about the whole crew, and that could be something that an encampment could do. So I like that idea. That's really cool. I would like to see, so I do have a hunch, fortunately or unfortunately, that I do think we're going to see some somewhat big changes, just because the second edition was not that big a change from the first, which would make it a surprise to me if they went 3 editions of the sort of essential mechanics of the game kind of staying together. And I feel like we're at the point of the video where it's worth addressing kind of the rumors that the internet won't put down that I don't really agree with, but that the rumors that Warcry 3.0 is essentially going to be marketed as Mordheim. I don't believe those rumors, but I do think that it's going to be marketed pretty differently, or like as like a harder reset, maybe than maybe what a lot of really big Warcry fans are looking for. And if we are going to do kind of mechanical changes with that, something that's been really neat to me, looking at Pyregeists, looking at Tyrannic Cohort, is ways that they're finding to let warbands affect the board without just using the abilities mechanic, like initiative roll, doubles, triples, etc. I'd love to see more of that, more kind of abilities that use different resources. And I don't know how that would be implemented from like a telling us what factions we're going to get kind of thing, or telling us what what specific mechanics we're going to get. But I do think we'll see even greater experimentation in terms of abilities that aren't just dice abilities that the different factions get. Of course, battle traits came along in the last core book we got, which is really interesting. The timing of it almost feels like they designed all of these in really quick succession, and then battle traits came along, and maybe the design, by the time they designed battle traits, I wonder if it was like right when third edition dropped, it was like they were finally putting the last dots on battle traits to then come out a year and a half later. I could see a next evolution of something like that. I don't know exactly what it would be, but I do think we're going to see a greater expansion of things that affect the board outside of the initiative roll and just the profile that your fighters are working with. So that's kind of my little hunch, I suppose. I don't know, like, is there anything in the game or on the board that you would want to see?
Yeah. So it is interesting to think about, and there is also, so looking at Underworlds and Emberguard, there is that wonder if they're going to reduce the pool and Kill Team.
Yeah.
Because they've got these massive books, they've got this massive backlog of trying to balance everything against everything else, and it's massive. So if they make any big changes to the core game, I always feel like resource-wise, you'd be wanting to go, I don't want to do all of that again.
Right.
So yeah, what's interesting is Dave Sanders and John Bracken were the two guys that took and run with it for second edition, and they were the ones behind Underworlds. And in Underworlds, they are constantly creative. They're constantly tweaking the sort of mechanics of the whole thing, and we see it in these Warband tomes that they're always dropping new stuff into them in quite creative ways. So yeah, I think something different on the board. I really liked the Chaotic Beast, and I think it's and that felt like a really nice thing, the first edition, and in that chaotic setting. And I would like to see, so say we have this coastal mechanic, the tides or something like that,
Right.
I'd like to see something that makes it right. We're playing in this realm now, and it does this extra thing that appears on some of those cards that you draw, and maybe some warbands. I guess the trickiness is it's linked to the location. You can't have some warbands interacting with it, but yeah.
Did you ever play?
I don't quite know.
Did you ever play? This is like right along the lines of what you're talking about. Did you ever play with the Bad Moon rules that they put? It was in like a White Dwarf. It was a long time ago. It was like pretty early in second edition. They came up with Bad Moon rules that any Gloomspite player could use in campaign mode. Did you ever try those?
I didn't, and I feel bad that I didn't, because I thought they were quite cool, and they were quite interesting. Because sometimes they weren't even good, which felt very bad. They were kind of like, okay, you're playing worse because you're actually fighting amongst yourselves a little bit, or jealous or whatever. And yeah, I did really like it, and they've done the same with the Ideneth. They did the in White Dwarf with the tides and that kind of thing. So again, there is that slight feeling that if they reduce the pool, they might have even more personality and those kind
Mm-hmm.
of quite unique rules to the warbands. I mean, they've done that anyway without reducing the pool, and it is. I think if it's a very much light reboot like we had last time, there's no reason why they can sweep the whole lot and just go, right, we've done tweaks here or there, but you've still got these books which are going to release as PDFs. But if they do big changes,
Yeah.
that feels like a lot of work for whoever's this, sometimes when you get these interviews, you find that somebody's done this, but it's because they were passionate about it. They've probably done it half of it in their own hours. They're like, no, I'm
Yeah.
going to keep it all in there because I love it so much.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if I don't know how sustainable that is when you look at every other game. It feels like they've got probably tighter windows to design these things, and they're not going to give them 2 months to restat everything, just practically.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about the bloat of Warcry in terms of there are 1,500 game pieces in this game, which is ridiculous. But it is part of what I love about the game is having so many different options. Though one could argue the number of real options is much, much less because of those 1,500, at least 800 of them are just bad, like just not any good. But if you're not playing competitively, that doesn't matter, and if you're playing narratively, you have that whole breadth. So I do wonder if Warcry is a less good fit for focusing down the way they did for Kill Team or Underworlds. But unfortunately, it just seems like such a strong sales tactic that they would probably do it regardless of whether someone like me likes it or not. Because I do think that, for example, with Kill Team, they said these kill teams are not going to exist. These kill teams are going to still be fully supported for a year, and these kill teams will be fully supported for 2 years. And beyond that, we're not making any promises. And it did convince me to buy a more recent kill team compared to one of the older ones, which I probably would have gone and gotten on eBay, right? So, for example, they're out. I can't grab one right now, but I had some Death Guard from just very shortly dabbling into what was this, the 8th edition launch box on eBay for 40K. I have some Death Guard from that, and so I converted them with Sylvaneth bits to be the Chaos Legionaries, and I did a Kill Team narrative tournament, and it was a ton of fun. But the Legionaries are not going to be around for more than another year, right? So when I was looking at getting a second team, I ended up loving the Legionaries playstyle, and I thought well, if I was going to get a team specifically for this game to expand beyond that, I'd probably want to go Warp Coven because they have kind of a similar Chaos Space Marines feel to them. I could probably find I already have Zangors from Warcry. I could find some Rubric Marines cheap on eBay. This would work perfectly. And then I looked at the rotation, and Warp Coven's only there for another year, and then they won't be fully supported anymore. And it actually convinced me not to get Warp Coven. And now I'm trying to decide if I'm going to get the Space Dwarves, who I think Space Dwarves are so cool, or the Drukhari team. So it does seem like rotation, as much as it makes people really mad, it does seem to influence people's purchasing habits in a way that's beneficial to GW. So I do think that it could happen whether we want it or not.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about the negative though. So it can make you buy one, but it can also make you not buy one.
Yeah.
And
but it makes me buy a more recent one that they make more money from, essentially.
Yeah, that's true. And then you sort of almost have to get it from them or a retailer that's just bought it from them rather than eBay secondhand. So yeah, it does feel like for them that would be a win-win. And again, I'm just thinking of the busy staff, the rules writer that's got X amount of time to pull this next edition out of the bag, and it's sort of it just doesn't. Yeah, I think it again. If it's a light reboot, there's the potential because a lot of the work's already done there, and this does feel like a much more balanced edition than first edition was at the very end of it. So
Yeah,
it's going to depend on how much it changes, which will be interesting.
it will be. And I think it could have been possible to interpret my comments before as being a little negative, but I do think that it's impossible for me not to notice that this latest edition of Kill Team is significantly better designed than any previous edition of Kill Team. And I've recently played Age of Sigmar 4, and it is so much better than AOS 3 was that it is hilarious almost. Like it's easier to play than AOS 3 was. It is more strategic despite being easier to play than AOS 3 was. Like AOS 3, I used to joke that 2 players line up and whoever forgets the fewest rules wins. So it's like it tested your bookkeeping really well, and didn't really necessarily test much beyond that until you got to like the very highest levels of the game. And one thing I love about Warcry is it's not that much bookkeeping, right? And in AOS 4, there's significantly less bookkeeping, but the rules that do exist have deeper strategic meaning, which is really cool. And so where that goes to Warcry is, I don't think we should fear any new edition, because I do think even if it's a big change and a scary change, I just can't help but notice that Games Workshop didn't used to be a very good rules writing company, and now they're not bad. Like they're getting a lot better at it over time. I think it's like, at least for the other 2 GW games that I play, it's pretty clear to me that the rules get significantly better over time. So I would be pretty excited about that. I don't know if you've gotten the same impression from playing GW games as me or what, but
yeah, totally. There's this really, really positive shift towards accessibility, and having somebody get this thing packaging. So when you think about the latest launch box of AOS, they're like, yeah, it also contains this whole spearhead mode with the full book. Also, there's 2 spearheads in it. Like, you can buy this, and this is a game that you can play, and people are enjoying it. I still have to play a spearhead game, and the only reason I haven't is it's 4 children. Not much hobby time at the moment, but the Emberguard book as well. They're quite streamlined, so that's an interesting one. That's taken some people have gone a different way, but reading the Age of Sigmar 4 book, like, it's just a pleasure to absorb those rules and cross-reference and just look through it, and the way that it works for me is just really nice. It's a complete positive. So Warcry is an interesting one because I don't know how much room there. I think the thing is, until I see it, I wouldn't have thought there was much room to streamline Underworlds necessarily. But there was. So there's probably stuff I'm missing with Warcry, just because I kind of know it now and I'm not new to it, and it sort of all just makes sense.
Right. And I think most of the time when I see people's ideas for the game, it's usually to add a lot to Warcry, because Warcry is already streamlined. But you're right that their tendency has been to streamline more than they sort of to boil down more than they sort of add on. And Warcry has a lot added on in terms of everything that happens before you show up to the table. It's like incredibly streamlined once you're at the table. I kind of like that about Warcry, that you can spend hours and hours all the time just obsessing about this game before you've even sat down at the table to play it. But I do wonder how much of that they'll keep. I hope they keep some of it. I hope they keep a good amount of it, but who knows? And I don't think, even though I do have a lot of fear about it because the unknown is scary, I do think we'll end up with a pretty cool game once it's all said and done.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting. I didn't realize we called the Gargants Ale Guzzlers earlier as well, and they're actually legended. That's not even their name, but Man Crushers.
So they're Man Crushers now. You're right. Yep.
So that's the grot name for them. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's like, can you package a warband where it almost comes with the specific cards for the specific loadout for like this is your 1,000 point and you can play it out of the box. I mean, it's like, but you can they kind of already do that. I mean, I suppose to a brand new player when they buy the box, there is still that. If I was new to it, I might be like, how do I build this to make a working warband?
Yeah.
And everything else they packaged it so that isn't a question. So there might be some scope there to. I don't know. It's hard to do that without taking something away.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, it should be interesting to see. Yeah. I'm all out of thoughts on this. I love that we managed to get through 90 minutes of different ideas for the future. Is there any one thing you want to leave folks with before we sign off?
Yeah, your slide says Bloodrock.
Oh, yeah. So, do you remember the very first trailer for Warcry Second Edition, where there's this giant red vulture?
Oh yes,
and it's
yeah.
eating some kind of, maybe it's a dinosaur carcass, it's some sort of carcass, and the vulture is eating it. And then the vulture looks up, and there's the comet goes by. And they told us, I can't remember what material it was, but they told us what that creature was, and it's a bloodrock. And okay, so this actually goes back. I can't believe I did a whole like speculation and wish listing thing and didn't get to this, but this goes back to the idea of like rotation, and how could you possibly create rotation? And some people say bespoke only, some people don't, but how could you possibly do that and keep the list building in an engaging and interesting fashion? To me, the only way you could possibly do it is if you created universal allies for the other Grand Alliances like what Chaos has. Ideally, you'd have some cheap ones too. Like Chaos, they're all in that 260 to 290 range, which is cool, but I'd want to see every Grand Alliance have one big ally and one kind of smaller ally that they could play with and that they could put into any list. And so the Bloodruck is the one that they've told us. They put it in the very first trailer, and then they never released it. But like Destruction would love to have a big vulture that they could put into any list, right? Because Destruction, Gloomspite is built differently than the other Destruction bands, but Destruction is full of these like big monster stompy guys who aren't that fast, but just do infinite damage. But they don't have anything like what Chaos and Order have, where like the Sylvaneth Archrevenant or the Cockatrice from Beasts of Chaos, or a lot of profiles like that, where in matched play, those aren't very good in the game right now. But in just to have them, it'd be really cool. And Gloomspite has some profiles like that, but in general, Destruction's just really poor on those. Like they just don't have very many options. Yeah, I really do think that Squig Riders are the only ones in the whole Grand Alliance. So I think that just a big, giant, scary vulture would be really cool in Destruction. I don't know. So that's why I want Bloodruck. I want universal Grand Alliance allies to allow us to have rotation, but still have list building, like compelling list building for each Grand Alliance. So I'm glad you reminded me.
That's such a good idea. Yeah. Just a creature for each alliance, at least.
Yep.
Because we had the Centaurian Marshal, we again had another Chaos one.
Right, another
Chaos
one. It's a
great model. It's amazing. Yeah, one for each of those. And I will jump in. My actual closing comments are: if it does change massively, we've still got really good balanced second edition with the books that we've got.
Right.
You can still play it, which is cool. So
yeah.
I think it's not a bad place to be in that I feel like this edition just works as a package. I've got the book as well with all the profiles on and little tweaks here or there, but actually all the PDFs are free as well and the PDF rules. So it's nicely packaged. If it were to go away, there's not much we lose.
Yeah. And you could we have so many materials now that you could, even if you like third edition but miss something that went away in second edition, we could make a cottage industry of home brewing second edition things into third edition so that we can play them anytime, because we have all the materials. Like you said, we have all the books, we have all the lore for every single thing, we have all the profiles. We can easily look at profiles that do make it into third edition. What kind of changes did they undergo? Now we could make the same changes into something that got cut, and we could do our own little homebrew into third edition, which could be cool. So yeah, that's a great note to end on. So thank you so much for joining me. I don't think at the beginning that I told people to go visit your channel, even though I did say that you had one. But please, everyone, go check out Hobby Jackal. Yeah, this was a real pleasure recording with you. I do have to go pick up my kids from daycare now, so I'm very excited to to do that. I'm glad that we were able to time everything perfectly. So until the next time, may all your rolls be crits.